All right, hey everybody. Sorry we're running a bit late. Had some technical difficulties. We're trying to multi-stream this thing to a few other places, and something was breaking. So anyway, welcome everybody joining us live on LinkedIn. And my name is Mike Grinberg. I've got Aaron Weeks here with me, and also Joseph Lewin is going to be joining us. He was having some camera issues, so he's going to pop in as soon as he can. In the meantime, we're just going to get started. Thank you all for waiting for any of those that were been here for the last couple of minutes. The topic for today is message market fit. And really what we're going to get at is why is it important? How do you accelerate it? And how does that impact revenue pipeline in the grand scheme of things? I'm going to do a bit of a monologue here first, kind of get us set up and started. And then Joseph and Aaron and I are going to have a bit of a conversation back and forth about some of these topics. They have some more detailed experience and expertise than I do in some of these areas even, so we'll get their input. And then last but not least, we'll open things up for live Q&A. Let me post the link in here again. So anybody that wants to, for that matter, at any point in time, feel free to join us in the live Riverside audience. And we'll open it up for Q&A. People can jump in, ask questions. Happy to chat with anybody about anything, really. So really quick, looks like a few people are rolling in here. If you pop in, pop a message in the chat, say hi so we know you're here and where you're at. And with that, let's talk about message market fit. So where I want to start is, first of all, what is it and why is it even important in the first place? Why are we talking about this? And the way to think about this is, when we're thinking about messaging is, does your message even resonate? Meaning, if your unique point of view doesn't get people excited, your offer and product really won't matter. So if you think about the goal being to build relationships, then what we need to do is understand our customers. We need to understand what gets them excited. What are they interested in? What gets them excited? What gets them out of bed? That kind of thing. And building our messaging around that and making sure that the message resonates. Brian, long time no see. Welcome. And Kaylee, good to see you as well. Looks like people are coming in. Awesome. Like I mentioned, I'm going to pop this link in here again as people are rolling in. Feel free to join us live in the studio. We'll open it up to Q&A live toward the end here. So again, as we're talking about messaging resonating, go-to-market messaging as a whole, really think about it as having multiple layers. We're going to simplify this down to sort of the core four. There's more kind of sub-layers, if you will, within that, but just to simplify the conversation. There's your story and your strategic narrative at the top. There's your unique point of view or point of views. You might have multiple that stem from that narrative. There is your product messaging, and there's your offer and your CTAs. Again, obviously, there's more to it than that, but just to keep this simple, what we often see happen is marketers will focus on those bottom two layers. They'll focus on product messaging and offer and CTAs. Why? Mostly it's because it's easier. That knowledge is internal, right? You know your own products. You have SMEs that know the products, they know the industry, let's just say, et cetera. As a marketer, you probably have thought about the offer and things like that. So it's easier to come up with the language and the details around that. The other thing is, oftentimes people go down to that level because they believe that it's closer to leads and pipeline and revenue and all that stuff. That's not actually true, which is part of what we're going to talk about. It's only true if the other two pieces, the other two layers are already in place. If the infrastructure for your product messaging and your offers are in place. If it's not, it's likely going to fall flat. So to do those first two layers, to actually get at them and build your story, build your narrative, and build your unique point of view, you have to do customer research, right? And there's a couple of things I want to talk about there. We'll get into this in more detail, I think, as we start talking. But customer research can be really, really broad, and oftentimes is too broad for when we think about messaging. We'll get at that in a little bit. I just want to throw that out there as food for thought. And the reason for that is we see people that, they focus too much on the need for quantitative and statistically significant insights, right? And to do that, you do things like focus groups, you bring in larger audiences to talk to, you do hundreds of interviews, you do on-site visits, you do surveys, you do all this kind of stuff, which all of those things individually and together have a lot of value, or can have a lot of value. The problem is it's not as critical for messaging, in our opinion, at least. If anybody's got a different opinion, we're going to open up the Q&A. Feel free to come argue with us. I'm happy to listen to other opinions. But it's very important for things like product. Okay, if you are developing a new product or a set of new product features or a brand new service offering, maybe even, if UX is important, especially if you're already a well-established organization, different story. Right, you need that detail, you need that volume, etc. When we're talking about messaging, our view, and we're going to dive into this right now, is it's better to accelerate it based on a smaller number of qualitative core insights, and then progressively test in market, rather than wait, say, 5 or 6 months to get all this information collected and then only then go to market. You're very significantly delaying revenue impact by doing that. So we're going to jump into some details here. At the core, there's some mindsets that we need to consider as we're talking about message market fit. So number one is we need to have alignment and we need to have buy-in. So we really have to have executive buy-in and alignment specifically. We have to have executive participation. I'm Aaron and Joseph. I'll be calling you guys to talk about some examples that we can definitely dive into. But it is absolutely critical to get executives involved, CEO on down, because you can't create that unique point of view in that story without executives. The other mindset is think about using the scientific method. So having a hypothesis is absolutely critical when you're going to go to market. So, and having a hypothesis that you can fairly easily test and that you can iterate on. Number three is progress over perfection. So kind of along the lines of having a hypothesis and doing iterative testing, it's exactly that, right? If at first we have a hypothesis that we think is say 60% likely to be true, great. Let's roll with that. It's better than 50%. It's better than flipping a coin. Let's get into market. Let's test it. Let's get some feedback. That allows us to go back and tweak things, go back into market again with a better hypothesis that maybe is, we believe, 70 or 75% likely to be correct. And you keep iterating 2 or 3 or 4 times, I should say, and you're going to get toward a very high likelihood of success. And you're going to see that through in-market data. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. So last but not least is, again, tied into that, limiting risk exposure. So don't just go and blast your message that you're not 100% confident in. or 99% confident in to everybody, right? This is not where you go and you spend 20 grand or 100 grand on running ads with product messaging, right? Too soon. That's something you do toward the end when you're much more comfortable and confident. So limiting risk exposure through progressive audience testing. So you might start with something more of a focus group or maybe like an event like this where you're going to go live, but you're going to talk to a small audience, right? There's only a few people in here, not that many. My message is very limited to who's going to see it, even if whoever watches this later on, as an example. Progressively, you go broader and broader and broader until you start actually putting dollars behind it and going and testing things. Again, we'll talk about this in more detail. So I'm going to stop talking, at least by myself. And Joseph, I'd love to get your thoughts on the alignment side of things. So you've just gone through this process several times, and talk about maybe in an example why executive alignment and executive participation is so critical.
Yeah, I think to your point, Mike, it's a lot of time and effort and energy to go through the messaging process, especially in a more traditional way where you're not doing the acceleration that we're talking about right now. And what I've found is that by the time you get to the point of putting it into market, that's a lot of times where the executive team will start to speak up a lot more loudly than maybe they did originally and saying, we're not comfortable putting that on our homepage, or, we're not fully bought into this message. So why don't we kind of just test it out a little tiny bit now, and then we could mostly keep running the messaging that we have right now. And I think, to be fair, I think it can be a really big change, and your messaging is really important, and it says a lot about who you are as a company. And I think a lot of times the executive team is bought in emotionally because they've been saying these messages and seeing their homepage this way for a long time, so they can be bought into that. So if you can get the executive team bought in much more early, especially for taking an iterative process like this, we're not saying, okay, now we haven't tested this messaging in the market at all, but we're very confident it's going to work. Let's change out your homepage or change it somewhere significant, start using it in all your sales calls. I think trying to get an executive way down the road to make that kind of a leap becomes very difficult. Whereas if we can get buy-in early, and not buy-in to change the homepage, but buy-in to test maybe the current messaging, A/B test it against some new messaging that we're trying out, so that we have data to go back to them and lay that process out, help them understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then how they're going to be able to logically see this play out over time, and then data to back up the decision that we're going to run with in the end.
Yeah, and interesting. What we often find is, Joseph, like you mentioned, and I've been on the other side of this, by the way. I'm like, we at one point hired a messaging consultant to help us with our messaging. It didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But the point I was trying to get at is we are very much bought into, as I was very much bought into, whatever messaging we had at that point. Right? And right now, I'm very much bought into the messaging we have right now. The difference is that this narrative that we currently have, that's live, that we're talking about right now even, is all based on customer research. It's based on events like this, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're actually going to talk about today, you're to a certain extent seeing live. Like we use forums like this to test messaging often, right? And test it live and get feedback and see what people respond to and things like that. Thanks, Brian, if you're still here. It's good seeing you. We should catch up at some point. So that's where I think, as the executives, again, they're very much emotionally attached to whatever's already out there, most likely, oftentimes, not always. And getting them on board to go through the process and see the output of customer research and the insights that come out, and then the in-market feedback is critical. Because oftentimes and we've seen this play out with a number of clients where the executive team might believe in the message and might be really good at communicating it, let's just say, might be really good at selling their service or product, even despite the message. But their team and other people that need to be involved, the sales team, etc., don't. But they're often not, they don't feel comfortable or they don't have a forum to maybe voice those concerns or don't have the time, etc. And getting the executives to buy into the process and be involved in the process is absolutely critical. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
Yeah. And Mike, one other point on this before we move on that I think is critical for getting that executive buy-in. Part of it is it doesn't matter how much work you do. If in the end of the day, the executive team says, we're not going to put that on our homepage, or especially in a lot of the companies we work in, the senior leadership or executive team are involved in a lot of the sales process. So even if the messaging goes on your website, but it's not consistent with what they're saying, it's not going to take off. But another reason that it's valuable to get them involved early on is because they have valuable input into the messaging and the process as well. And I found that even after doing customer research, the executives tend to have some extra hidden information that I didn't think about, that wasn't revealed in stakeholder interviews, wasn't revealed in customer research, that they bring up once we start addressing this messaging. And they go, well, if we take that angle, we're really siloing ourselves into this type of business, and our business objective is to kind of go in this other direction. And if they're not involved in that process early on and have buy-in, you're not going to learn that again until you're 9 months down the road. You want to go to launch it, and then they're giving you that feedback at that point. And that could set you back months and push you even further out from getting things out to market.
Definitely. So with that, Aaron, one of the other things I mentioned was, from a mindset perspective, was progress or perfection and progressive testing. I'd love to hear you talk about that, because that's a big part. I mean, obviously, paid media is your specialty, and that's a big part of this. So talk about that.
Definitely happy to discuss that. I think what is really important, and we all need to remember, is you do need to do the research. You have to have that alignment, because what that's going to help out is when it gets handed over to me and I'm trying to distribute and amplify and test the message, I have that runway to do what we need to do, which is move quickly. And that's going to be super important with progressive testing. So we were just talking, the three of us, that in every company, there's a message that works right now, right? Through message market fit on paid distribution, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Can we quickly ship that message to the right people at the right time? So that's first, right? And what do we learn from that? We did the customer interviews. Maybe we learned that message does not resonate with our ideal customer profiles. Great, let's test that too. And then through this iterative process of, again, aiming to action, let's ship it, let's learn from it. We can have an iterative process to get a much faster message. So we can get it to the market faster, relationships can happen faster, and then revenue can happen faster. So that's super important. I do some tactical things I do want to mention, because that is why I'm on to give you some tactics here. Is be like very specific how you kind of categorize your message and why. Like, for example, we run strategic narrative ads. We want to know if the strategic narrative works. Maybe you run product ads around pain agitation. How does this product solve that pain? From a paid distribution standpoint, I would kind of encourage kind of your paid media team to like really think about it that way. As you categorize that content, you move quickly. You can quickly answer, like, I can go back to Joseph as a strategist and say, hey, strategic narrative ads are killing on this channel. Let's run with that. So I'll kind of stop there. And if you want me to kind of dive any deeper in any other details, happy to take that away.
You're on mute, Mike.
I put myself on mute to not have people hear me typing away a comment here. But one of the things to talk about would be, I think, maybe a common mistake that we see people make, which is start getting too granular and too segmented with your messaging too soon. Like you see this all the time. People are like, oh, well, we need to have a totally different message for this industry versus that industry, or this audience group versus that audience group. And part of this gets into, I think, the research piece as well. I think it's yes, you are going to find some differences most likely, but it's also important to find and focus on the similarities. Like what part of your narrative gets people excited across all the different groups? Because if you go too granular too soon, you risk, I mean, there's a bunch of risks to it, right? I mean, Aaron, you can talk about, audience sizes and that the time and the money it takes to test all this kind of stuff. But also what honestly we often end up finding is the differences are so small. They really don't matter until you get into like sales process and you're going to address the differences in like pain points and priorities and things like that, say by industry, in the sales process, not necessarily up front, right? And from a core message perspective, sure, you can have content that's specific to different industries, right? Case studies, for example, that, hey, here's a case study we did for aerospace versus auto versus banking or whatever, right? So anyway, I swear there was a question in there somewhere. And
Yeah, I think I'll talk through one specific example. What kind of resonates with me is when you're doing this message testing, you are going to find messages that don't work. And I think that's what you can really learn to move faster. So we had a specific example with a client that we were running a strategic narrative, trying to get it to the market, trying to get it to, again, the job titles, the people in our ICP, which is C-suite. And we thought one pain agitation message, which was about staffing and scaling and flexing, we thought it was going to work. It didn't. It wasn't, there was no engagement on the channel. It wasn't resonant. And what I want the listeners to kind of take out of that is not that that message is good or bad, but it was the wrong message for the wrong people, right? And that's really what this message market fit is trying to do, is make us get a little faster of getting the right message to the right people. And again, at some point you do want to segment that out. But for a lot of us, is back to the original point, is we don't really know what message works right now. So let's start there. Let's do this quick iterative process through distribution, test that strategic narrative in the market, ship it. What works? Okay, great. Now try that in the next market segment, which is kind of what we were doing with that wrong message is, okay, let's serve it to the right market now because we learned that it didn't work. So I just want to give a specific example. And just as you're on that account, I don't know if you have any other feedback or insights from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a strategy perspective, and when you're doing the customer research, you have to take a little bit of a humble pill and communicate this to the client from the beginning, that we have expertise. We're going to go through, we're going to listen to customers, and we're going to, we're skilled at being able to go consolidate that information and get insights from it. But that doesn't mean that the first iteration of our messaging is going to be right. To Mike's point about having at least a 50% or hopefully a little more, but about 50% gut reaction that this is going to be right, you're really better off to communicate that clearly to the clients up front and say, this is a test. This is an educated guess based on what we've learned. We are using data inputs, but if we wait until we're 95% sure, it's going to be a year or two. And then by that point, things could have shifted in the market. So I think speed to market is such an important thing to keep in mind when you're doing messaging and working on messaging. And that's really the goal here, is to say, we're going to learn, we're going to make our best educated guess, and then we're going to test that through paid ads to really try to narrow down what's working. And there might be some ideas in there or some messaging that I thought was going to be great. And I have to be willing to look at that and go, that did not work. We're going to leave that one be. And, vice versa on the flip side. I think that's part of the executive team buy-in as well, is helping them kind of get to that same place and say, hey, let's all take what our perspective is on what this messaging should be and have open hands with it, and be willing to trust that when we put this out in front of the market, they're going to tell us what's working and what isn't, so that we can progressively make that better. And I think we found that specifically with the account you're referencing. We're marketing to an executive C-suite audience, and the much more tactical, straightforward, clear messaging didn't actually resonate with them. It was this more emotional messaging around, don't go it alone. There's a team here that can support you. Much more, much less tangible in a sense, which from my perspective, what I've always heard is pretty opposite to what people would say a C-suite would respond to. And we learn that by working with a client who's open to testing things that might be a little outside their comfort zone. And then once we test it in the market, we're getting that feedback and it validates what we're trying to do.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I made a note to come back to that. In that example, it was the emotional message that really resonated. And I think I'm personally actually not surprised, and here's why. The goal of your narrative should be, you want people to react in one of two ways. You want them to say either, never thought about it that way, or yes, finally somebody is saying what I've been thinking. Either way, either of those two reactions are a form of excitement. They are like, never thought about it that way. That's exciting. Or, yes, finally, I dig that, right? And excitement is an emotion, which means if our goal is to get people excited, we should be looking to test emotional messages. Now, that's going to be different for everybody, and what people get quote unquote emotional about is going to very much differ by industry, and even by even within a specific industry, right? Different subgroups, etc. But I think that's a really, really important part to call out around message market fit is, kind of going back to one of the things that people get wrong is going too low in that kind of in the layers and talking about product and offer. Those are very tactical. Those are very logical. Your product is a logical thing. Your offer is generally a logical thing. It misses that emotional connection, which usually happens a few layers above. Which also I think maybe is a good transition into one of the other things we want to talk about, which is, I kind of mentioned it briefly in the beginning, when people think of a customer research, they often really focus on trying to get quantitative data. That's why surveys are so popular. That's why when people do customer research, they try to get like large customer groups so that the sample sizes are statistically significant, all this kind of stuff. And what our argument here is that we shouldn't focus that much on it. Not for go-to-market messaging. There are other places where that's important, like I mentioned. But our goal should really be to get a few really core qualitative insights that we can build a hypothesis around and test it in market. So, Aaron and Joseph, you both have done this a few times recently. Would love to hear you talk about examples of that.
Definitely. Want me to take it away, Joseph?
Focus on the qualitative side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then you fill in the gaps. Okay. So I think qualitative is very important when you get to the distribution and amplification of the message stage with your paid media. Is where I'll start is, again, that customer research is so important. Because when I'm writing the message and I know I'm going to ship it, it just gives me that qualitative confidence that I heard a customer say this is a pain. Let's go test it in the messaging. So again, highly encourage talking to your customers all the time. Makes the whole process a lot easier, at least for me as a paid media person.
Aaron, I'm going to interrupt you really quickly just because there's something you just said sparked a thing.
Sure.
Not something we worked on, but something recently I saw, and I know the company. So there's a company called Gated. A lot of you maybe have either used them or have heard of them. If you don't, maybe you should. Anyway, the company's called Gated, and they were going through an interview process, through their customer research process, or they were talking to customers. And one of the things that popped up randomly during a customer interview was, hey, your product is like noise canceling headphones for email. And their CEO now has that as their pretty much unofficial tagline to a certain extent, right? Did that message get mentioned 50 times over with 50 customers? No, it got mentioned once, but they put it out there, and guess what? It resonates like crazy. So just another example of live. You can see it out there. Again, the company's called Gated. Andy Mowat's the CEO. You can look at his profile. That's what he's got as his tagline. So Aaron, sorry to interrupt. You're talking through the example there.
Yeah, great addition there. I think, again, just to reframe is we're talking about kind of the qualitative insights you can grab along the way through the iterative process. So one specific example, and then Joseph, I'll call you to come in, is, using who reacted to the ad, who engaged with it, who shared it, who commented with it. Again, as a performance marketer, I am looking at metrics to test a message, average click-through rate, engagement, social actions. I'm looking at all of those, but what's really going to give me that confidence about, is this the right message for the right people, is actually viewing those profiles. Is this a job title that we're trying to target in our ACP? Is this someone our client actually want to work with, right? Like we asked them, is this a great fit customer? They're like, yeah. That stuff is going to be that kind of qualitative cocktail, I'll call it, that's really just going to give you that confidence as you move through this iterative process. And again, we have one specific example where someone saw our ad on about the second week. Well, 90 days later, they came back, and that's where they filled out a form on the website to start a conversation. And again, we wouldn't really know that as we're starting this process, this iterative process. But as we go along the way, looking at who are these people? Are they the right people? Great. When we got to that point, we're like, oh, wow, that's someone who saw our ad a long time ago. I think that's kind of the beauty of this iterative process. You want to add anything, Joseph?
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting things that were brought up. So for one, as far as quantitative versus qualitative, I do think that people get a little bit off because they're used to hearing market research done by companies like P&G or something. In that case, it's like, okay, you're trying to Mike's point, you're trying to develop a product and messaging that's going to reach literally everybody. I mean, they're trying to reach, with most of their products, a massive audience of people. In that case, you want to pull insights from all over the place. But even for them, they get their best insights from going individually, learning about how they've done their research. They will go watch people clean in their individual houses, and then there'll be something they'll see in an individual person's house that will spark something. So even when you're talking about companies that do massive research to get a ton of information, they still get some of their best insights from those, from the small things. And I think that's important to think through, especially for a lot of the customers that we work with. It's usually not going to be the generalized thing that you're really going to be able to speak to. It is that very specific example, and it is that unique wording that one person is going to use to describe what you're doing that really encapsulates it. And if you're doing something like sending out surveys or asking for a written response to something, it's not that information is going to be bad, but you're going to get some general feedback. You could go, okay, a lot of these people generally think this way, but you're not going to get those deeper insights that help you drive messaging that's going to make somebody go, oh man, I never thought about it that way. Like if everybody's saying it, then it's not something that they're going to go, oh, I never thought of it that way before, because it's what everybody's thinking. So it's once you can get that kind of unique angle that I think it really pops. And then to your point, when we're able to just quickly test that and validate that messaging, we're able to go much faster. And then that's another point for why it's important to start testing these things in market early, because when you get those qualitative insights and you start driving that message from a qualitative insight, you get quantitative data once you've been running that for a certain portion of time. And so once we've been running a campaign for 6 months and we're seeing it working over and over and over again, okay, now we have a statistically significant amount of information that's validating that messaging, and we can get that. But it starts with getting that qualitative information first.
One thing I want to add, Joseph, because we talked about this on another live, but it is important, is that sometimes that data may not be readily available to you. Maybe you have to actually aggregate it yourself, which we talked through an example where I have a spreadsheet where I take real people, their real profiles that saw our ads. I just built it over time. But what that helps us know is, again, if we're going to build relationships at that scale, let's see the relationships we can make. These are the people we can have conversations with. I pulled them from, again, the different channels, but you can aggregate that stuff when you need to put qualitative and quantitative together, and necessarily the ad platforms don't do that for you out of the box, right? So there are things that you can do to kind of help what we're both talking about here.
So we got a question. Brian asks, can we define market in message market fit? He says, would you consider existing customers and new customers as two separate markets? The reason I ask is that we use basically the same messaging for both groups, but the new volume growth just isn't there. Both groups are basically the same, but one performs and one doesn't. By the way, we are in the underbanked vertical where there are tons of like businesses on every street. Pablo, welcome. You missed everything. No, just kidding. Perfect timing. We're going to be chatting live with some folks hopefully here. So Brian, it's a really good question. There's probably a few things I want to clarify before giving an answer. I'm guessing Aaron and Joseph will as well. I popped a link in the chat here. If you want to jump in there, that's the audience link, and that should give you should have a button, a call-in button once you jump in. You hit that call-in button, we can let you in and we can chat live if that works for you. I'll give you my gut reaction to that question is I think the market's the market. Your current customers, if you're targeting correctly, should be the same as or similar to your new customers. So if it's not resonating for the new ones, either A, something has changed in the market that you haven't addressed yet, or the message wasn't maybe even resonating as well initially. And the only reason it's quote unquote resonating is because they already know about you. Oh, here's Brian. Here we go. I'm going to stop yakking and I'm going to let you in. How about that?
Hey, guys.
Brian.
Can you hear me?
Brian.
We can hear you. Welcome.
All right. Thank you. Enjoying it. Finding it informative. It's the first meeting I've joined like this. So
awesome.
Keep on.
Hopefully it's a good experience for you. We don't scare you off.
It is. Well, you kind of scared me a little bit because a lot of things of what you're saying are just hitting right at home, and it's like, wait, are they eavesdropping in my office? But
well, if it makes you feel better, this is all from kind of compiled from all our work with a bunch of other clients. So you're not the only one. These are all common things. Anyway, with that said, kind of going back to your question. So it sounds like what you're finding is the messaging you currently have works for existing customers, but isn't really working as well to garner net new.
Right. We're subprime lending. We're like the Title Maxes and that sort of thing. And it's a family-owned company, but there's 40-something stores within South Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama. And the message seems to be the same. It's what along with the C-suite, compliance is a big part too that we haven't mentioned. And those guys will tie your hands to the chair, just to avoid the risk. So it's what can you say, can't say, but basically it's the same message that we're sending out, and our existing customers continue to rewrite and they continue to stay, and it's a retention benefit, but the new volume's just not coming in the door. And what I'm seeing is that we're sending the same message out, and that's another question. I had a ton of questions is when it comes to messaging, how often can you change the message? Because we're changing it throughout the year and maybe not enough time to let it mature and find out what it's doing. Tax time, hey, do you need to pay taxes? Come in. Or do you need a cash your check? Come in. Christmas time, do you need money? Come in for the gifts. We're throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks, but we're a small company and there's not a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There's not a lot of patience. So it's like, I've given you this $1. Did you give me back $1.25? And I'm like, well, I can't tell you right now. And those are the kind of things I'm thinking, do I need to segment my messaging with my agency that says we're having two separate campaigns. One's existing customers, one's new customers. We're doing geofencing and we're geofencing stores and all this other stuff, but we're using the same messaging. I could be geofencing a transmission shop for folks who need money like that, but also geofencing Five Below to get folks who are interested in smaller dollar amounts. Same message. So that's where I wanted you guys to kind of define the market in the fit and I guess the message too.
Well, I think if you guys don't mind, I'll take the first crack at it, and then you guys can add more detail or feel free to disagree with me too. I think
it's a great question, though. By the way, Brian.
Oh, thank you,
Brian. What you're describing is, I think, similar to what we were talking about initially, right? So all the examples you gave are, I call those product messages, product and offer. right?
Mm-hmm.
The question, my question becomes is, are your existing customers staying and rewriting and all that because of the message, or because they've already experienced the service and the product? Like, yep, this works for me, right? And whatever, you could send them anything and they'd do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's true, but that's the question I would have. And then on the flip side is, like, if I don't know who, and I apologize, I forget what's the name of the company you're currently with?
Always money.
Always Money. Okay. So if I don't know who they are, I've never seen them, never seen a storefront, whatever, and they throw out an offer to me, there's no trust there, right? So I have no reason to respond to the message.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about is you have to take a couple layers up and figure out what is it that these people worry about, what gets them excited, whatever it is right now. And like I say, you're a little bit different. I mean, we generally deal with a B2B buyer rather than a consumer. But I think some of the concept is still true, in the sense that, what is it that's going to get them excited? Like, is there another way to talk about the products that you offer? Like, I never thought about it that way, right? Because we know that they have some negative connotations in the market, and people think they're predatory and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to start a political discussion here or anything like that.
Well, the last vertical I came from, so it's like I jumped out of one and into another. So
fair enough. But the point is there's already these like preconceived notions, right? So how can you make somebody go, I never thought about it that way? Or, yes, I really need that, right? Like, I think to me, the seasonal stuff is great once the trust is already built. But I think the reason why you're seeing it not work is because that trust doesn't exist. And if they don't know the brand, if they have no reason to trust you, you haven't given them a reason to do so, I guess I'm not surprised. So I don't know, Joseph, Aaron, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this recently with a client where, especially from their senior team, they didn't really feel like they had a messaging problem. There were definitely people lower down that recognized that they did and were advocating for some more thought to messaging. And what it really comes down to is that the executive team was talking to people who are coming in on referral. So if somebody already knows who you are, or they've been referred by somebody else, their existing business, it really is completely different, because they already have built that trust. And so what's going to work with them, it's not that they wouldn't resonate with the same message that somebody new would, but somebody new isn't necessarily going to resonate with the same thing that an existing customer will, because they don't already trust you, to Mike's point. And so, I mean, without actually digging into it and getting into research and everything, just from the outside looking in, what it sounds like to me is you guys are speaking a message that is built on the trust that you've already gained. Or, even if it's just saying, hey, we have this product, we're going to give, we're going to get this offer in front of you. If they already trust you, they're going to trust that that's a good offer, and they're going to move forward on it. Maybe they'll vet it a little bit, but not as seriously as somebody who's never worked with you before. Whereas somebody who has no idea who you are at all, they're going to automatically distrust everything that you have to say. And they're going to look at everything that you put out there with a much higher level of skepticism. And that's where you want to find out, well, what was it that originally got the person to become a customer? And that's where the customer research comes into play, and where you can't just get that through a survey. Like, if you send out a survey to your existing customers and you say, how did you first start working with us? You're going to get very generic responses. But if you can ask another question or two or three underneath that, you're going to actually get down to the bottom of it and start to find out, okay, a significant portion of the customers that you've worked with before love the service that you guys offer, and how that's just, everybody else treats them like a commodity, and you guys give them white glove service. Obviously, I'm making this up. I have no idea.
Right.
But, maybe that's the differentiator. And that's actually why they ended up coming over. Whereas, maybe you were originally thinking they came because of this one message. And then that helps you to go, okay, well, if we take that unique angle, we can create messaging around being a white glove service that's going to go above and beyond and help you understand what's going on and educate you, take the time with you, and having that messaging might end up then resonating with a new audience versus just, here's our typical offer and products.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because what I've done for projecting next year is I did get them to approve some traditional media budget. I want to get on television where you can target certain demographics. We're heavy in digital already. We can't do too much with Google advertising based on the vertical we're in, but I'm thinking if I can get that television and that radio, and we can really target those audiences where they're listening to music, where they're watching programs, they start seeing us on television, then they start getting these offers in the mail that say, hey, here's a firm offer of credit, come into us. My marketing assistant that I hired back in March, she had spent 5 years in the stores, and what she basically told me, it's a wealth of information. She said, the existing customers, it's like a barber. We're not offering any different haircuts or any different pricing, but they've come to us so long, they know us. We can almost bank on them coming in the 5th of every month to get their monthly cash advance. It's there's no real call to action that drove them to it, that keep driving them here, but we need to find that nugget. And if you guys could do that, none of you would have to work a day in your life anymore, right? That magic bullet to get that new guy to come in. And another step I take, and you can tell me if this is wrong or not, is I readjusted my KPIs. I have them for existing customers. Here's what I'm going to make with the money you give me, and here's what I'm going to make with the new volume. It's going to cost you a bit more to get that person in there, but our digging shows that once we get them in here, they stay and they keep rewriting. So I've taken those 2 steps, but I think you guys answered my question. I do have to treat them as 2 separate markets when I'm looking for a fit, 2 separate call to actions. Pretty much, I don't want to say that existing customers are on autopilot and I can let them go, but it's sort of that way. Just keep doing that customer loyalty and giving them great service, but getting Mike in when he's getting 5 different offers from Joe's Lending and Always Money and Bob's Lending, and he doesn't know one from the other. And it's tricky. It's tricky. I have to meet my metrics at the end of the year.
Yep. Well, I think the big thing is again, the think about, there's a trust factor that needs to be built, right? And there's what is it that's, again, I think finding out why your current customers are with you and why they stay with you, I think is a core component to this, because that's what you want to communicate to the new people.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say it as they're 2 separate ones. Yeah. It's just that you can get away with messaging with current clients that you can't get away with and still get new clients in. Okay. So, I mean, I wouldn't say 100% across the board, but most of the time your messaging should still resonate with existing clients. And we're talking about, this is probably slightly more high level. Like this isn't, it can get into a specific product offering and the way that you communicate that, but this is more like one step back from that. When somebody thinks about your company, what is it that they're getting from you that they're not going to get from everybody else? Like not just benefit either. It's more like what value are you bringing to them that they're immediately going to go, okay, that's worth it for me to work with this company. Or, what can you be saying and communicating that helps them have trust with your company? And that messaging shouldn't alienate existing customers, and it should still resonate and build, even more trust with them. But it's more understanding that a cold audience is, to your point, most likely going to cost you more. In the B2B market, if you've been operating primarily off of referral and relationships, it could lengthen your sales cycle in that case. And those are things that you do want to take into consideration as you start bringing new cold audiences in and you have a message that's going to connect with them and resonate. And the only other thing I'll say is if you're doing traditional media, I think in a space like yours, and Mike, you've done more of this stuff than me on that side, so you might disagree, but for your particular audience, just off the top of my head, that might not be the worst place to reach them because they are listening to radio and stuff like that, maybe more often than some of the audiences that we would typically be going after.
Digital streaming audio and video might be a good place to go.
We did YouTube. We did YouTube bumpers, and we did buy some space. We did digital ads for streaming radio and streaming television. Again, that's very hard to track. And when I'd bring it back and tell the folks, the C-suites, I just spent $20,000 of your dollars. Can't really tell. We got a few clicks, but how many folks really click on those ads when they're on Spotify free, and the ads play? it's you're getting out there, you're getting to be an earworm if you have a jingle, but you can't really go back to the COO and say, look, 100 new customers last month because of this, because of Spotify, that sort of thing. That's the buy-in I need to get.
Yeah, well, I think that gets, and this is, we can take this offline, Brian, if you want. I think that gets into a measurement discussion in terms of, I think the way you'd want to measure impact of whether it be mass media or even streaming video or audio is not going to be through clicks. It's got to be through correlation between, okay, we ran, like, you have to do like time series analysis. We ran this. Here's what we saw from our branded traffic. It went up. Right, as our direct traffic, it went up. Or people or store traffic went up in specific regions. Like, there's a bunch of ways you can set up these tests. You're not going to get, if you're looking for direct attribution, it's just never going to be there.
Right.
So, anyway,
Mike, Pablo might be able to jump on. He has an interesting question. But one thing, Brian, that I think is important to mention while we have you on here is you had mentioned that you're looking to do this traditional media and more media spend. And I would really encourage you to take the time to find 5 of your existing customers that are a really good fit, who would be willing to jump on the phone with you. And then you're just trying to dig deeper, just trying to understand who they are, why they're working with you, what's resonating. And that's really, let that define what kind of messaging you're doing on those ad spots that you're doing, no matter what they are. And that's, if you're going to be investing ad dollars, invest the time in talking to some customers and really getting that information so you can find that message market fit.
Absolutely. Guys, I appreciate your time. Aaron, we play a lot in your space too, but I guess I couldn't talk because I can't push this meeting off another half hour. So I've got to drop and give the floor to somebody else.
Thanks, Brian. It was good seeing you.
Mike, it was good seeing you too. Thanks, guys. Bye.
See ya. Pablo,
I guess we're
getting
to the end of our time here, but yeah, Pablo had some.
We started like 5 minutes late. I think we can. Actually, I don't know. I gotta look at my calendar. Can I go late?
I do have a question for Mike and Joseph, because I think Brian did ask a good question. Like, how do we define a market? And I think there is some criteria there. And if you want to do total addressable market, or we're looking at your best fit ICP, I think we do need to start there. If Mike or Joseph, you want to talk about that a little more.
I mean, I personally look at it as your kind of the entirety of your, what we call the relationship ecosystem, right? So your market is your decision makers, the internal influencers, and the external influencers. That's your market, because you have to be able to influence that all of those people, to especially in the B2B space specifically. So to me, that's how I define market. I wouldn't necessarily obviously you overlay that with industry and all this kind of the basic firmographic stuff. But that's how I look at it. Joseph, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some people get a lot more technical about it than I do. But to me, it's just who's your ideal audience, and you definitely want to make sure there's enough of them that exist out there. But I think total addressable market with most of the companies we're going after, it sounds super nice and fancy, and you can do a lot of interesting calculations with it, but you're not going to reach everybody. You're not going to get everybody to buy in. So it's really about, are there people, a significant number of people in the market who are going to react to that message and buy into it? And is that a significant enough amount to be worth your time and effort and energy to create messaging for them? And so to me, the market is your potential customers out there that would actually buy from you and be in market within a reasonable amount of time. We're trying to reach those folks and get them to jump in.
Pablo, what's happening? How are you?
I'm great, man. It's good to talk to you face to face. It's great
stuff.
I
know.
I really like what you're preaching up here, man. It's really cool stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we're kind of preaching to the same choir. So thanks for jumping in. So you're asking whether we have good questions or frameworks to get qualitative insights on how clients go from problem aware, solution aware to problem or unaware to aware. It's interesting. We're kind of just having a conversation about this. What's that?
I said timely question.
Yeah, we were literally just talking about customer interview questions and frameworks this morning internally. I mean, a specific question. I think one of my, I guess, framework wise, maybe where I'll start, and then Joseph, you can chime in. Is I think the goal with customer research on messaging, I feel like, has to be around focusing on getting stories, right? Because what you really need is context for qualitative insight, right? Because you're not going to get that quantitative, like, okay, well, yeah, it's 1,000 people are saying the same thing. Well, no, we're only going to talk to 3 or 5, which is still not a statistical sample, right? So if we can get stories, that gives us the words they use, the context in which they were, and then a specific question, for example, would be whatever. Gosh, I'm trying to think of it now. Like, tell them, like, let's assume it's a specific product or vendor they're researching. Tell me what was happening when you first decided to start the search process. Like, what, really the goal, what you're trying to get is give me the story behind the trigger event. Don't tell me what the trigger was, because they could say, oh, well, whatever. Our revenue was down. Okay, cool. That doesn't tell me anything. But it's, oh, our revenue was down because of this, and there was investor pressure, and we were about to go public, and yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, that's a very different kind of trigger. Now that gives me a completely different type of insight. I don't know, Joseph, if you want to throw anything else there.
Yeah, I mean, my philosophy on messaging and customer marketing is that, if we getting down to features and benefits is important at a certain point, but that's not really the best place to start with messaging, because people look at features and benefits when they get to that point. They've already kind of defined what problem they're trying to solve. They've kind of defined how they want to solve it, and then they're going to lay out a matrix to look at the different features and benefits and see if they line up, and and all of that. That's a very logical exercise at that point. And so either they're going to be very price conscious, or they're going to have something going in that's motivating them, and you're not really going to move them by having one extra feature or another. I guess it kind of depends if it's a make or break feature. But what I think is really powerful with messaging is if you can reach people before they start defining all of those things. And the way to do that isn't through a super logical, straightforward statement. People don't change their worldview or their perspective on something because of logic. They do it through emotion. And so that's where you want to have a message that speaks to, yes, the problem that you're solving and elicits that, but also kind of gets that person to go have an emotional response. To Mike's point earlier, saying you want this person to be like, man, I've never thought about it that way. Or this is how I think about it, but I've never heard anybody else say it that clearly before. Or, I've been trying to tell people this, but I'm glad there's somebody else out there that agrees, something like that. If you get that kind of a response, and that could come through making somebody excited. It could come through making somebody angry. It could come through making somebody laugh about something. Any of those kinds of responses, you're much more likely to get them to move over to your point of view. If you win them over to your point of view on how to solve a problem, what the problem is, how to solve that problem, then by the time they get to features and benefits, they're then looking at that more and how to make it work versus, anyway, I'll just stop there.
Yeah. One thing to add, Joseph, because in a past life, I did conduct customer interviews in another role. For the emotional question is sometimes my favorite one was, what keeps you up at night? Like, if you want to get an emotional narrative, you have to ask emotional questions. So I think you can figure that out in your own way, how best to ask that, but like extract that stuff, right? Like if you ask people genuine questions about themselves, they're going to give it to you. So that's kind of one I'd like to throw out there too.
Yeah,
I think that's a great
I personally
point.
like tell me about the worst day you've had on the job. Now, again, that could lead you in a bit of a tangent, but oftentimes they'll give you a story and you go, oh, wow, that's pretty bad. Like what impact did X, Y, and Z play, right? So at the end of the day, kind of going back to the framework, I think it's what's really, really important is to get the context behind whatever trigger, because then you can talk about that trigger in a way that's going to actually matter. And then that's the way you get them from unaware to aware, because once that trigger is there, it's a triggering event that they can go, oh shoot, I didn't realize the solution even existed.
Yeah, and I'll give you a specific example to
Hey, guys,
illustrate what we're talking about.
I got to hop off to another call, man. I just wanted to hear you talk through this. I thought it was super cool. Mike, I look forward to having you on my show in January, man. This is great stuff. Like let me know when this next thing goes live. I want to be a part of this. This is awesome.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for jumping on, Pablo.
Thanks, Pablo. See ya.
I guess he's not going to be here anymore, but I'll finish the thought and then we could wrap it up. Specific example is going back to the messaging for one of our customers we were talking about earlier. As we were digging in the customer interviews, we start finding out, okay, we're talking to CEOs and CMOs, but this language keeps coming up around how they feel alone, and there's instances where they can't always trust people on their team. And so then having a partner or a guide that's going to come alongside them that's neutral, that isn't looking to grow their career, that they can really confidently trust that they know what they're talking about, and they can help them get from point A to point B. That's what really has resonated with that audience. And so it's this idea of, don't navigate being the CEO alone, don't navigate this kind of path that's unknown. And that's the part that's really resonating. Again, it's kind of uncovering those emotional triggers that are getting somebody to do that. And then the other piece of it is, where do they want to go? And so what are they ultimately trying to do by solving this problem? In this case, it's biotech companies are trying to maximize the value of their therapeutics. And that's how they make money. That's how they pay their investors. And ultimately, that's also how they end up getting these drugs to the market. Because if they don't successfully maximize the value, it's not going to be valuable enough for patients to actually end up getting it and have payers pay for it and all of that. So we're speaking to where they want to go and helping kind of speak to that ultimate goal and kind of philosophical goal that they have. And then speaking to, hey, this is the challenge you're facing. You're going this alone. We're going to walk alongside you to get you where you want to go.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to wrap this up. If anyone else has any other questions around message market fit, messaging in general, I know Brian was kind of talking about, we kind of got into measurement a little bit. Feel free to ping either me, Aaron, or Joseph on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. All right,
absolutely.
And with that, this is going to wrap up our session. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you all next week.